Lang Hancock, prospector and mining entrepreneur. Mr. Hancock is a partner in the Western Australian mining firm Hanright. He's also a vigorous advocate of private enterprise and of the development of our north. Tonight on Monday Conference, Opening Up Australia. Good evening. What we now know as Australia's mining boom began back in 1952 when a sudden rainstorm forced Lang Hancock to fly his light aircraft at a very low altitude across the Hamersley Ranges in the northwest of Western Australia. What Mr. Hancock saw when he looked down was iron. Since then, iron ore has made millions of dollars for Mr. Hancock and hundreds of millions of dollars for Australia. Minerals are now our biggest single export earner. As for Lang Hancock himself, some people have been kind enough to say that he pays more income tax than anybody else in the country. He's certainly the richest and most famous prospector in our history. And in anyone's terms, he's one of our greatest individualists. When you speak of the right to mine, are you saying that the government should have no stake whatsoever in the minerals that come out of the country? Or
in communist countries and in socialist countries and in most dictatorships and in Australia, the minerals absolutely, in law, belong to the Crown. They are the property of the state. But they're useless under those circumstances because they stay on the ground. Now, if you want to get them worked, if you want people to put hundreds of millions of dollars of their own money and not the taxpayers' money into them, you then have to turn around and give the people that are going to put all this risk money up the right to mine them. So there's got to be a transition at some time from the useless cocoon of state ownership in the ground to the active, useful ownership of the people who are putting up the money and the know how to work them. So there's got to be a change.
Yes, but does it necessarily have to be one extreme or the other? That's what I'm trying to get at.
What do you want? Some sort of a semi-socialist ownership of them in conjunction with the private people risking their money.
Do you see any limits to the advantages of foreign investment? Did you have in mind any ground rules?
Well, I don't think you can do this. I don't think you can do this by rigid dictatorship and saying Australians, you've got to put your money in. You know, I just don't think they will put their money in. So I think it's better to leave it alone. But what I think is that if you can get the foreigners to take all the risk, as they have done now. See, in these things, the governments know nothing about them. The foreigners come in here at the moment, and initially they've taken all the risk, they put up all the capital, and the Australian government sits back, contributes nothing, takes no risk, and gets 47.5% of the profit.
Mr. Hancock, sorry, but on this point, couldn't a cynic argue that if these big international firms put their money in, they're pretty hard-headed, that, by golly, there can't be much of a risk after all, that maybe you are overstating the risk element in all this?
Well, you try and convince that to these chaps that lost all their money on the stock exchange, that every mine's a Hamersley mine. I think
oh, no, that's not what I'm...
There is a risk.
I'm saying
risk.
These hard-headed international businessmen know a good thing when they see it, yeah. And yours was a good thing.
Right, okay. Now, there's another one of these, and we can't mention names on here, that it's so good a risk that the foreigners had 92.5% of it, and now they've sold it off down to 15%, and the poor unfortunate Australians are contributing to it. So they're not all bonanzas by any manner of means. But in time, if you've got enough foreign investment coming in and you've got enough of these things rolling and producing enough wealth, I think Australia in time will be an exporter of capital, just the same way as Britain was and just the same way as America was, and the pendulum will turn, and it'll turn from a very wealthy country, and we'll spread our wings all over the world just as they're spreading their wings here. Yeah. And also, I think it pays to remember that from the Pilbara, if you measure the distance round to Sydney by sea, and then use that distance as an arc on a map of the world, that arc would encompass something like 2/3 of the world's population.
And in what way did the West Australian government interfere with your getting the money to start the
mining?
Well, having called for advertisements, having made our discoveries and having spent our money, they said thanks, or if they didn't say thanks, they just said grab, we'll confiscate this and we'll parcel it out amongst what we call the pioneer groups, the big four, under an areas of influence policy. So to protect ourselves from wholesale confiscation, we negotiated with partners, international partners, who were too powerful to be steamrolled like two individuals.
What I can't understand in this business that you have, the endless sort of trouble you seem to have with the West Australian government, whether it's a Liberal or a Labor one, is why do you think the governments are motivated the way they are? Why do you think they behave the way they do towards you?
Firstly, I think it's mostly a misunderstanding. I mean, the little tiny government of a Cinderella state suddenly pitchforked into dealing with a thing of, international, because standing. I mean, iron ore is an international mineral. It isn't just an Australian mineral. And they suddenly had this lot pushed on their plate without being prepared for it. They've been over-ambitious and think, well, this is a big thing. We'll really get into this. And without any training or skills on the international scale in engineering or mining or financial, international banking or anything of this nature, this whole thing, complex problem, has been thrown on their plate. And instead of getting to one side and letting the people who put up the money and understand the business and have been successful in all other parts of the world hop in, do it quickly and churn the wheels over and everybody benefit from it, they say, no, we're going to handle this.
Your critics on the West Australian government say you're very difficult to deal with, you and your partner. Would you agree with this?
Yes, I certainly would agree with it. And you'd be difficult too if somebody came along and tried to take something from you, I think. At least I hope you'd be difficult.
Mr. Hancock, within 12 months from now there's to be a federal election. How important do you see the outcome of that election to what's happening in Western Australia?
I don't think it makes any difference. You've heard of the Gortlam policy, haven't you?
In effect, you can't see any advantage between a free enterprise Liberal government and a socialist Labor government.
I believe in the principles of the Liberal Party. I don't believe in the practices because they're socialist. Look what they've done over there. You'll remember that one of our ministers said that they were going to believe that the railways, and these ones that are being built by private money, they should be government-owned, government-controlled, and placed where the government thinks they ought to go. Then, having got the famous Pilbara plan of confiscation rolling, whereby they confiscate our discoveries and split them up amongst the big four, if this works, they're then going to move down at the nickel fields and they're going to socialise those to the extent of taking them off the little boys and splitting them up amongst the big three or the big four, and then the railways down there, and the power is going to be nationalised, and so on and so forth. Well, this to me is a socialist dream. Now, with the fact that it comes from the Liberal Party or something, well, I can't explain.
So it doesn't really matter, you think? It's 6 of one or half a dozen of the other, whether we've got a Liberal or a Labor regime?
At the moment, anyhow.
Well, why
things sort themselves out.
Why should this be so if these two parties profess to have completely opposite philosophies?
Well, I think, Peter, your knowledge of politicians is probably more intense better than mine. I can't explain why. You would think that they would be in rival camps and they'd have rival philosophies and they would stick to them.
Mr. Hancock, I think you're one of the few people in Australia to have taken on the conservationists. In an article you wrote, you spoke of the policy of unbridled conservation. It's usually put the other way around. How would you bridle the conservation movement?
I think that we've just a case of let them run, and in time, because they will unfortunately stop that much industry. They'll bring the country to its knees. People, I mean, they're getting upset now because of the 100,000 unemployed. What happens when there's millions of unemployed? I think that in time, that conservation, the pendulum will swing, and that'll be a dirty word, just as mining is a dirty word now. You've got to remember that in Australia, less than 1/5 of 1% of Australia's land surface is under mining. And this 1/5 of 1% with the fade out in wool and primary produce is going to support the whole of Australia. Well, now, if the conservationists are allowed to run without interference till they close up all the mines, who's going to pay everybody's wages? So I think all you can do is just wait till the fad passes. At the beginning of the century, the world used some 26 million tonnes of iron ore. Today it uses 700 million. And if the graph continues going upward, in 10 or 12 or 15 years' time, it will use 1,400 million. It doubles about every 12 or 15 years.
At this rate of consumption of iron ore, should we be worried about the stocks running out?
Never. If you turn, the stocks are so great up there that if you, for instance, make some sort of a comparison and think that it took 10 years to build the Suez Canal, if you took that quantity of dirt each year out of the Australian deposits in the form of iron, you could go on for longer than man will inhabit this earth. You could at least go on for 1 million years.
You said the kind of thing, the governments don't produce anything, don't make anything. Do you concede that they do anything that matters, or...?
I regard them as soaring sawdust, you know, just getting in the road.
Is it government inaction that bothers you?
No, I don't want any government action. This is about the last thing that you want.
Do you think lower taxation would raise living standards?
I'm sure of it. I mean, look at the impoverished British nation. They wiped out 1,400 million, didn't they, or taxes from productive avenues to encourage production.
What is it that drives you? Some men who have an income, yours is reputed to be $30,000 a day, some men who've got an income of that nature would be quite content to sit back and perhaps leave things as they are. But you seem to be on a charger in the cause of free enterprise. Why is it?
Well, obviously, it isn't, if anybody that's read the things that I've written, it isn't to make friends. I think that's going to be ruled out pretty well. I don't know that it's just to accumulate piles and piles of money, because if that's so, I've made a bit of a mess of it because I've tipped all the money back on the ground. So it must be something else. I don't know what it is. I suppose it's what drives a fellow to go out in the bush and look for things. What drives a fellow to go and do this, that or the other.